Arab speakers in the world is the voice of Palestine. And she was murdered. Excuse me.
I understand.
We have to be on TV here. Okay, that's fine. We have to be on. He has to do his. Thank you.
Good morning. We're here at Fox 8. We appreciate the fact that Fox 8 is collecting the school supplies for the children. However, if we wouldn't have a $853 Pentagon budget, everyone could afford their own school supplies. But today we're standing up not only for young journalists in Cleveland schools, but for all the journalists from Fox 8 around the world. And we hope that they won't be scrutinized, murdered even, by our governments and silenced by our corporations. So thank you very much and good morning. Today we're gathering in remembrance of Shireen Abdu Akleh, who was killed in Palestine 1 month ago by the Israeli occupation forces while she was trying to report the news. We're totally opposed to any corporate or government interference with our news media. And as you know, Shireen Abdu Akleh is a US citizen, was a US citizen. We're also here today for Julian Assange, who's being extradited.
Keep it to your mouth.
Thank you very much.
No, he wants to just keep us on the grass so we don't block the drive.
Again, we appreciate Fox 8 for doing this collection. And we are supporting young journalists and journalism across the nations. I'd like to call on one of our speakers today, Greg Coleridge of Move to Amend. Greg has a few words to say about where the money goes and our corporate influence.
Should we be on that side? We should be on that side.
Oh yeah, voice.
Israel's military now says it's considering
I appreciate all that. I appreciate all that.
But here's the problem. Israel investigating itself typically never leads to any meaningful measures of accountability.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Freedom of speech and freedom of the press are considered to be two of the most sacred components of the First Amendment. And given where we are today, should we not add freedom and having the right to assemble without interference, without arrest, without intimidation? We are here this morning to affirm all and many other freedoms of speech, of the press, and of assembling to speak to injustices in all their forms. And we are experiencing many injustices: political, economic, ecological, social. The one we lift up today is the lack of freedom of the press to speak freely, to be able to do their job without interference, without intimidation, without the threat of being treated violently, imprisoned, and tortured, and more, killed. Unfortunately, those freedoms are not being recognized in this country and abroad. Sadly, in supposedly the cradle of freedom in this country, there are many exhibits of those journalists who have been intimidated, who are being subjected to various forms of silence, of censorship, of torture. And in the case of Julian Assange, of being basically imprisoned for life with the key thrown away. And why? Why is he being basically treated as a war criminal? Because he exposed war crimes. War crimes made by and tried to be hidden by the United States of America. Under not just one administration, but this is a long-standing effort by many administrations over many years. Information that WikiLeaks exposed, and that he did his darndest to let the American people know what their government was doing. The fourth branch of government, supposedly, to the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branch, is the media. It's supposed to be anyway. But that's contingent on the media being free, being able to cover what needs to be covered, and most importantly, to hold those in power accountable. Accountable to one another and accountable to we the people. That has not happened and will never ever happen so long as A, the government continues to try to silence those who would expose truths, and B, so long as the press and the media isn't free, but has been captured, as it has, by corporate interests, who have as their interest, self-interest, to maximize profit. And when it's convenient, which is damn near almost all the time, to work in consort with the government that's trying to silence and quiet and prevent the truth from being exposed. So we are here to call out the government for their acts of trying to silence whistleblowers and those free journalists like Julian Assange. And we're here to call out the corporate press. We're also here to affirm, lastly, as I close, those journalists who have a conscience, those journalists with integrity, those journalists who are willing to defy the orders from down on high, who are not going to be chilled by the threats of their executives to just say, to just cover what is decreasingly a very small box of what is acceptable, quote-unquote, journalism. That oftentimes, and dare we say, sadly, has become mostly infotainment and not real news, not real coverage of what we really ought to know about what is happening in our country. So we stand with those journalists right behind us, right here at Fox 8, and call on them to do what they can within that small box, but to go outside that box, to break free of that box, as well as to encourage their peers to tell the truth and to hold those accountable who need to be held accountable. And lastly, to work with those in corporate at the national Fox News to do what they can to call attention to the atrocities, to the injustices being inflicted on Julian Assange and those like him. Thank you.
Warren, we heard that, I know that you were just in Palestine, occupied Palestine, for about a month, and the day that you arrived, is it true that you heard of the killing of Shireen Abdu Akleh? Could you tell us about that, finding out about that?
Yeah, actually, it was about the 4th or 5th day that I was in Palestine. We had gone to Ramallah and met with the director of Adamir, and the director had told us this was a very sad day, and we didn't know why. We asked her, did something happen here in Ramallah? And she said no, that her very dear friend, Shireen Abdu Akleh, who was a journalist for Al-Jazeera for over 25 years, almost 27 years, had been shot that morning. Shireen was up in Jenin, where she was documenting some of the protests for home demolitions that were taking place there. And we asked her if they knew who had killed her. At that point, she said, "We don't know, but we suspect that it was the Israeli Defense Force." The whole time that I was in Palestine, I was there for 32 days, and I kept listening to the news. Most of it was in Arabic, which I did not understand, but it was going back and forth between, did the Israelis or did the Palestinians kill her? About a day or two after she had been killed, she was in a hospital near Sheikh Jarrah, and as our bus drove past there, we saw the Israeli army or military were outside the hospital. They were trying to get her body, and they were trying to get the bullet. But there's been controversy back and forth as to who it was that shot her, and the U.S. is just saying it was an accident. Our media is not allowed to really investigate and tell the truth of what really happened. It was a sharpshooter who was not far from her and shot her right in the neck, and she died almost instantly. And it was really sad. She was really well loved by all the Palestinians and throughout the world. There were media coverage from so many countries abroad, as well as within Palestine, and I assume within Israel. The day that her funeral took place, the men were carrying her casket through the streets, and I believe it was the IDF, Israeli Defense Force, they were there and they were hitting the men with their batons and hitting them and kicking them, and the people almost dropped the casket. It's like they had no respect, even when someone has passed away. So throughout the month, there was a lot of reporting as to what people thought happened. And my last couple nights there, I met a man in Bethlehem who had written a poem about Shireen, and basic message of it was that Shireen died, but she's still alive. And he would see her all these different locations in Palestine where she loved: Jerusalem, Jenin, Ramallah, Bethlehem, Nablus, and it was just so inspiring. He talked about how she is the star of Jerusalem. You know, people just had such a heart for her. So it just really has touched me ever since I've been home. I've been trying to listen to the news to see what is the truth about what is happening.
Emphasize she was a Christian Muslim Palestinian. She was a Christian Palestinian.
Shireen was an American
Christian.
Palestinian,
Christian.
also Christian. And still, our media here in the U.S. is not giving much more detail other than to say that this was an accident. Thank you.
We're going to move on to WEWS Channel 5.